saddle up because this will be a pretty good Mihawk video. I promise you that. Because Mihawk as a character is rarely discussed in the One Piece scene. Everyone yaps about his power, how strong is he, his standing, his bounty, all these things. But no one really wants to dive into the character. Because at the end of the day, Mihawk is someone that we know is gonna fight and lose to Zoro ultimately. So people just kind of care about that and that the most. But you don't really see that much of a deep dive into the character of Mihawk, and particularly, I would argue, why he is the way he is, which I think is very intriguing, because I think that in a lot of ways, Mihawk as a character does not follow the iconic words of Blackbeard. Blackbeard's words have applied to the vast majority of important characters of the entire series of One Piece, these iconic words. But Mihawk seems to be an exception to that rule, which makes it very intriguing, because you have to wonder if every character operates according to these mystical Blackbeard words, but he is potentially the only exception. Why is he the exception to the rule? I've had these ideas in my mind kind of stewing and stirring. They've been charging up, powering up like Dragon Ball Z characters for quite a bit of time, 15 episodes minimum, ever since we had a conversation between, well, not a conversation, a statement made by Ronor Zoro in chapter 1073 to S-Hawk. Zoro said, and I quote, "Now that I get a better look at you, you're actually a little more human than him." Him referring to, obviously, Mihawk. Now, hold on. That's a really weird statement to make, because based on appearance, Mihawk, we see him, he has that sort of vampiric look to him, very gloomy, like where he normally resides in, that gloomy island, has a cross necklace, and of course for the ladies, vest always open, showing that crazy 8-pack figure. We know how he looks, but to say that this jumped up size, black-winged, flame-on kid that has green goo in his arm, he looks more human than Mihawk, is a very strange statement to make. It really is, because Mihawk, based on appearance alone, it's very obvious. Mihawk looks way more human than S-Hawk. S-Hawk as a seraphim looks very abnormal compared to many of the humans. And so Zoro's statements have depth to them that probably go just beyond appearance, because Zoro's one of the few cats in the entire story One Piece that does know Mihawk very well. So taking his words at face value make a lot of sense. And the only way this whole appearance thing works, for let's say he does physically look more human than Mihawk, is if Mihawk has some sort of form that hasn't been showcased yet to us. So let's say he is some sort of vampire. He comes out looking like Deborah from Dragon Ball Z. All right, fine, fair enough. Or let's say another example could be, the theories are right, where he is a genuine sword. Mihawk himself is the Blade Yoru in some weird way, and then because he is the blade itself, S-Hawk looks more human than Mihawk.
I don't know.
That for this video doesn't really matter. I think what matters, not the appearance of it, but it's the person themselves. And for this, again, he is abnormal from many other people of great standing in the story One Piece that all follow the words, the iconic words of Blackbeard. And what are these iconic words? Everyone knows the words. Chapter 225. People's dreams don't ever end. And Mihawk, I think, is a person that doesn't abide by this to a great extent of his personality, for his persona, which is why he doesn't seem to be human compared to someone like S-Hawk. Hear me out. Think about, let's say, a lot of characters in high standing and high esteem. Characters like, obviously, Luffy and a lot of the crew members. The Emperors of the Sea like Big Mom and Kaido, Shanks and Buggy. You look at, let's say, people like Akainu. You look at the Elders and the Holy Knights. People of great prominence in certain countries. When you look at the cornucopia of many individuals in the entire story One Piece, almost all of them have dreams, goals, ambitions, desires that move them forward in life, whether it be an overall grandiose goal or ambition, whether it's a day-to-day goal. There's always something that people are reaching out for. And we in the real world are very similar, where many people, the vast majority of cats, have some sort of goal or some sort of dream, ambition to achieve in their lives. And so from that point of view, you can say that it is a very human aspect. It is a very human element for someone to have. Someone like S-Hawk is a seraphim, but he is going to grow at an abnormal rate and get much stronger. So even though he may feel, let's say, emotionless, they have to follow orders. But at the same time, because they're so young, like in the same way as Bonnie, their future, what they can achieve is limitless. Even as a seraphim, because he's young, that alone does open up many avenues for what S-Hawk's future could be. There are people in the world of One Piece that had dreams. They lost their dreams, but then they could still find even something else afterwards. So a great example, since this person's been getting a lot of talk and hubbub as of late, for crazy reasons, Gecko Moria and his Gecko Pirates got defeated by Kaido and company in Wano Country during the Oden flashback. Gecko Moria, we know from the pre-time skip, lost his entire crew to Kaido and the Beast Pirates, to the point where he feared Kaido in the New World so much that he decided to enlist someone like Hogback and other very strange allies to do what? To make a zombie army, an undying crew. So the same pain and the same anguish that he felt in his heart when his crew got annihilated by Kaido and company, he would never go through that again. And even those folks that have achieved their dream in some sense, even these folks exhibit the ambition and the goals that someone like Mihawk has not done so. For example, Whitebeard. Whitebeard's goals and ambitions didn't involve the treasure. For him, he was on that Fast and Furious grind.
Salute, mi familia.
Salute. Salute.
Family. He was all about family. Not only had he achieved such a massive family across the entirety of the New World, but also the fact that Whitebeard had been given the title of the world's strongest man. According to the Ace Light novels, his very life was that of the strongest pirate alive. And he had amassed the greatest territory in the New World. Someone of that status, who even Mihawk himself wanted to see how far he was from someone like Whitebeard, he still pulled up to Marineford to save Ace. He still adhered to the code that he had lived most of his pirate life by. And the dreams and goals that fueled him still applied to Whitebeard, even at his old age, someone that, again, you could argue easily had completed his dream. But Mihawk has none of that. The only thing he's doing is just waiting to die.
The man wants to die.
Mihawk is a man waiting for someone to claim his title as the world's strongest, the world's greatest swordsman. And even though in his past he even had that epithet, that title of Marine Hunter, when we think about his actions when the Marines actually pulled up in chapter 956, before the ultimate chapter, which, by the way, the corresponding episode was one of the first of Megumi Ishitani's works in One Piece, and it was incredible. And what does Mihawk say? He says, "I feel the thrill of excitement. It's been a long time since I was the one being chased." Mihawk says that in chapter 956. And then 100 chapters later, when he's talking to Crocodile, what does he say? He says, and I quote, "The Navy has its island surrounded at the moment. I need to pick up and move base, bothersome as it might be." And you can see how that excitement, that fervor, the Marine Hunter having the chance to unsheath his blade on the very Marines that he was known for dissecting and eliminating, gone out the window. Mihawk, where was all that fervor? Where was all that excitement? Where did it go? Outside of Zoro, nothing has really any staying power with Mihawk, where he has these sort of blips of excitement, like ripples in a totally still lake. But after that initial pulse, it fades away. Like with many things, since his introduction, why did he go to the East Blue in the first place? He hunted Don Krieg and his men, annihilated the largest East Blue armada, and he did it because he was bored. So in a similar case here, there's a good chance that Mihawk ultimately became bored, and even though he was the Marine Hunter, that excitement, that fervor that he felt momentarily fleeted and went out the window. And then that same chapter, 1058, what does he say? He says, and I quote, "I don't know about you, but I don't want to be an emperor. I prefer a quieter life." So Mihawk, who has the chance to be an emperor of the sea, literally an emperor of the sea, someone who is a pillar of the world itself, the New World, the next stage, the next evolution, the pathway is there for Mihawk to go to that next level. He closes the door. He closes the door. I'd prefer a quieter life. The only time Dracule Mihawk made any real moves in the story were in the pre-time skip, and most of these moves center around Luffy and the Striped Pirates, where he meets Shanks in chapter 96 about Luffy and company. He even goes to the Holy Land and he has that meet with the other warlords of the sea, and he doesn't care at all about the other warlords and so on, but he does care about that pirate crew that they're gonna be talking about, of course, Striped Pirates. Because obviously from this point on, he's banking on Zoro to be the one to end his legacy. There is one thing outside of Zoro being able to be him in the future that does move Mihawk's soul a little bit, and that is making a utopia, per se, with Crocodile, where he says this in chapter 1082. Him and Crocodile want to build a utopia, and so they need overwhelming strength so they can face any adversary, any government, any force they want to overthrow and or destroy their utopia. But following Mihawk's trend here, a utopia to do what? For him, Netflix and chill with Yoru. And that's unironically literally it. Other men that have achieved more than him, on a higher standing him, that have also achieved their dreams too, they still make moves. They still are massive players. Only when the Marines forced his hand to come to Marineford, okay, fine. I have to pull up because I am still a war of the sea, so I gotta do what I gotta do. Because I don't lose that status in the future, and then now the Marines are on me. But even when they did pull up on him, he was like, oh yeah, cool. And then afterwards, what happened to that? Actually, I'm bored. Mihawk like a zombie. Going back to Blackbeard's words, I really think, in many respects, Mihawk is very similar to a native of Mocktown, the dreamless city on Jaya. Blackbeard's words, of course, cut against all that, but I think that Mihawk, in many respects, like the citizens of Jaya, where all these folks in Mocktown, essentially, they just go there to have their just dreams die, basically. No greater desires. They just drink, and then they party, but that's really it. They have nothing to like reach out for in an overall sense. And Mihawk, I think, feels very similar to that. Because even if Crocodile and him do achieve their utopia, you know that Crocodile's gonna be amassing money, he's gonna be controlling people, let's say like the biggest underground broker you've ever seen. Based on his history, we can tell what Crocodile's gonna do based on broke works. But what would Mihawk do?
Nothing!
And that, I think, is the main crux of why Zoro said what he said about Mihawk. I think it's that. In a similar way, it's like my boy Brock from God of War 4 and 5, where Brock is missing a key component of his soul. He's missing something that prevents him from being a completely living entity. If people's dreams never end and Mihawk has ended his dream, then in some sense, he is lacking a core cornerstone component of what it means to be a person. So going back to S-Hawk and going back to Zoro's comments about S-Hawk and Mihawk, it's not that Mihawk is shape-shifting or is transforming in some way, but I think it's the lack of the normal human elements that you would see. Even S-Hawk compared to Mihawk, S-Hawk, who is a seraphim that is being controlled by the world government, even he arguably isn't lacking the same things that Mihawk is lacking, which would make S-Hawk more human in Zoro's eyes, despite the obvious radical physical differences. And besides, power users transform all the time too, and yet you never see Zoro talk about the lack of humanity in people like Rob Lucci or Kaku. If that was the case, then Zoro's comments would be pretty surface level, but I don't think they are. Which is why I also believe that Buggy is a godsend to Mihawk. Because what does Buggy do in that very same chapter 1082? He forces Mihawk and Crocodile's hand. He literally tells them, stop making these lateral moves, because I know what your real dream was. The very same dream that so many kids had when they became pirates going into the New World and the Grand Line. Mihawk did have these goals and dreams that were far, far, far bigger than what he is just waiting to die for now. Whether it was because of what happened with him and Shanks back in the day, whether it was because of his Marine Hunter days, whatever it was, we don't know, but the idea is that he had them. They existed, and Buggy is bringing these things back into the forefront. The things that were hibernating within Mihawk for decades. It is Buggy that is going to force these things back out. And I think eventually he'll have to admit that Buggy was correct. Same for Crocodile too. They'll have to admit that Buggy was correct. During Roger's execution, they were there. They were at ground zero, which validates Buggy's words even further. You were there at ground zero when Roger died, and you weren't moved? BS. Even if it's on the verge of death, let's say, for example, if Zoro kills Mihawk full on, even at that point, I think that if Mihawk does remember what he was really fighting for, he may really become more human than he's ever been in a very long time. That's what I think, though. Mihawk, I think, has probably been very stagnant, ambitionless for a very long time. Stagnation, like water that goes bad after a while. Stagnation, the antithesis of life itself, which is based on movement and motion. His soul hasn't moved in decades for whatever reason. But now Buggy is coming in and he's adding some turbulence to the standing water of Dracule Mihawk. Let me know your stance on the subject matter at hand. If you enjoy your boys' video content, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and click on that bell to join the notification squad. I'm gonna catch you guys and gals on the flip side.
See you. Bye bye.